I stood by my sister's coffin, numb, watching dirt spill over the polished wood as if the earth itself were greedy to swallow her whole. The mourners clutched each other, whispered words of comfort they didn't mean, their eyes darting to me only to quickly look away as if my grief were contagious. My sister Leah had been the bright one, the kind one, the type of soul this world liked to devour first. They said she overdosed, that it was an accident, but I knew better. I had seen the bruises on her neck, the fear in her diary entries, the name she had scrawled over and over again in trembling ink. The man who had promised her love, then delivered only pain. I wanted blood, but all I had was silence, until the box appeared. It was placed on my lap by an old woman wrapped in black lace, her eyes sharp as knives themselves. She leaned close, her breath cold against my ear, and whispered, "For her, for you, for all of them." Then she was gone, vanishing into the crowd of mourners before I could ask who she was. The box was small, no larger than a bread loaf, its wood dark and veined with cracks like veins under skin. A brass latch kept it shut, and when I opened it later that night, my world split into before and after. Inside lay 13 knives, each blade thin, gleaming even in candlelight, their handles engraved with names. The first name carved there made my blood run cold, then hot: Daniel Cross. Leah's lover. The man I knew had killed her. For hours I stared at that blade, tracing the letters with my fingertip until they seemed to cut into me. Was this a trick? A curse? Or was it justice, gift wrapped in iron and rage? My heart thudded like a drum in a funeral march as I picked up the knife, felt its weight, sharper than any kitchen blade, hungrier than any weapon should feel. When dawn came, I went to Daniel's apartment. The city was still half asleep, the hallways quiet as I pressed my ear to his door and heard him snoring. Safe, content, alive. My sister lay in the dirt and he lay in warm sheets. The thought ripped something in me wide open. I didn't knock. I broke the lock, crept in, and when he stirred, blinking at me in confusion, I drove the knife into his chest. The sound was wet, intimate, obscene. His eyes went wide, his mouth formed her name, then mine, then nothing. I pulled the knife free, and before I could even catch my breath, it dissolved in my hand, vanishing into smoke that smelled faintly of iron and rot. I staggered back, gasping, staring at the empty air where it had been. My hands shook, my stomach lurched, but underneath the shock was something worse: satisfaction, raw and burning. I checked the box the moment I got home, desperate to know what it would reveal. The first slot was empty now, a faint scorch mark where the blade had lain, and the next knife glowed faintly red, as if it had been waiting. The name carved on its handle made my knees buckle: Marianne Keller. My old teacher. The woman who had once saved me from failing school. A woman I trusted. Why was she on this list? I told myself I wouldn't do it. That Daniel was justice, but this would be madness. I shoved the box into a drawer, buried it under clothes, swore I would never touch it again. But that night, I dreamed of knives clattering against each other, whispering names, whispering my name. I woke to find the box sitting on my nightstand, though I hadn't moved it. Its lid cracked open, the second knife glowing brighter. It was waiting, hungry. I didn't sleep for 2 days, pacing, sweating, thinking of Marianne's warm smile, her steady hands, how she had believed in me when no one else did. Why her? Why now? But the longer I waited, the more I felt it. The itch in my palms, the gnawing in my chest, the knives pulling at me like strings on a puppet. On the third night, I broke. I walked to Marianne's house with the knife hidden under my coat, telling myself I would just look, just watch, just see if the box was lying to me. She opened the door before I knocked, smiling, her hair silver now, but her eyes still kind. She invited me in without hesitation, poured tea, asked about Leah, her voice trembling with sorrow. I almost turned back, almost ran. But then she reached for the sugar bowl, and my eyes caught a small tattoo on her wrist I had never seen before. A symbol that matched one etched into the wooden box itself. My heart stopped. She saw my gaze, froze, and in that pause I knew the truth. She was connected to it. Maybe she had been part of what killed Leah. Maybe she had passed the box down. Maybe she had secrets buried deeper than I could imagine. But I didn't let her explain. The knife found her chest before her words found air. The box hummed when I returned, as if alive, its second slot now empty. The third knife glowed, and the name carved into it shattered the last of my illusions of choice. Ethan Ward, my best friend since childhood, my only real ally. My blood turned to ice, my stomach churned, but beneath it all, that same grim hunger whispered, "The knives are never wrong." I didn't want to believe it. Ethan Ward had been there when Leah died, holding me back at the funeral, making sure I ate when I starved myself, checking my pulse when I drowned in vodka just to shut the pain up. He had been more brother than friend, a piece of my own marrow, a survivor of all the hell we'd walked through together. And now the knives told me his name. I tried to fight it. I left the box locked in my trunk. I left the city. I holed up in a motel for a week, smoking until my lungs burned, staring at blank walls until my eyes blurred. But no matter how far I ran, the knives followed. I'd hear them rattling in the drawer when I tried to sleep. I'd smell the tang of iron when I breathed too deep. I'd see Ethan's name carved into the dark behind my eyelids. When I finally broke, it wasn't rage that drove me, but despair. I showed up at his place shaking, praying that somehow the box was wrong. Ethan opened the door with that easy grin, the one that had disarmed cops and thugs alike when we were younger, and he pulled me into a hug like I was still his sister. I almost cried in his arms. But then he whispered, "You opened it, didn't you?" My body went cold. He pulled back, eyes searching mine, and I saw it there. Guilt, knowledge, the same mark on his wrist that I'd seen on Marianne. They were all connected. My voice cracked as I asked him why Leah had to die. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence between us was enough. I felt the knife heavy in my coat pocket, and before I could think, it was buried in him. The look in his eyes wasn't anger, wasn't betrayal. It was relief. His blood soaked my hands as he whispered, "It should have been me." Then the light left him, and I was left holding nothing but a body and a truth I couldn't understand. The knife vanished like the others, leaving only the taste of iron in the air. The box hummed in my trunk when I drove home, louder than an engine, louder than my heartbeat, and when I opened it, the fourth knife already glowed, brighter than the rest. The name carved into it made me stagger. Leah Cross, my dead sister. I dropped the box, staggered back, shaking my head, whispering, "No, no, no." It was impossible. She was already gone. But the box didn't lie, not once. Not with Daniel, not with Marianne, not with Ethan. And if her name was here, glowing, then maybe she wasn't dead. Not fully. Maybe she'd been part of this. Maybe she had been taken. Maybe the knives were pulling me toward a truth so vile I couldn't even look at it straight. My grief twisted into something sharper, a new kind of rage, not at the knives, not even at the people they demanded I kill, but at the idea that Leah herself might have been complicit, or worse, might have been alive when they lowered her coffin into the ground. For days I hunted whispers, clawed through old papers, broke into records, bribed cops. What I found gutted me. Leah's death certificate was signed by Marianne Keller. Ethan had been the one to call it in. Daniel had been the one to pay for her coffin. All of them tied together in a circle I hadn't seen until the knives forced me to. My sister had been their sacrifice, but for what? I still didn't know. All I knew was that the knives wanted me to finish the work, cut down every name in the order they presented, until the truth bled out onto the floor. And the more I obeyed, the less I felt like myself. The knives whispered to me now, even when closed, their voices in the dark, coaxing, laughing, promising. By the time I drove to the graveyard with the fourth knife in my pocket, I wasn't even sure if I was still human. I dug into the dirt above Leah's coffin with bare hands, nails breaking, skin splitting, the knife glowing brighter with every handful of soil I threw aside. And when I reached the coffin, when I pried it open, my scream tore the night apart. It was empty. No bones, no body, just a smear of blood on the silk lining and a symbol carved into the wood that matched the one on the box. She hadn't died. She'd been taken into whatever web this was. The knife in my hand flared once, then dimmed, as if mocking me, as if telling me the truth wasn't ready to be revealed yet. I collapsed in the mud, clutching the knife, staring at the stars as if they could explain what the earth had swallowed. And then I realized the box was heavier than before. When I opened it, my heart nearly stopped. There weren't 9 knives left, but 10. A new blade had appeared, its handle cold as ice, its name carved deep enough to draw blood when I touched it. And when I read that name, I felt the ground tilt beneath me. It said Vera Cross, my name, my death waiting, my place in the order. The knives weren't just weapons of vengeance. They were a curse, a prophecy, a cycle that didn't end until the wielder bled like the rest. That night, in the silence of my room, I sat with the box on my lap, staring at my name etched in steel. I thought of Daniel's shocked gasp, of Marianne's pleading eyes, of Ethan's whisper of relief, of Leah's empty coffin. I thought of all the lies, all the blood, all the hunger in the knives that didn't just push me, they consumed me. And still, even knowing the truth, even seeing my name waiting, I couldn't stop. My hands shook as I closed the lid, but I swore to myself I would not die before I carved out the answers buried in this cursed list. If the knives wanted me to, they'd have to wait. Because first, I would make them all pay. Every last one of them. I stopped sleeping like a person, and started sleeping like something hunted. One eye open, one ear listening for the whisper of blades in the dark. The box sat on my table like a sleeping animal, its wood slick under my palm. My name etched cold into the final handle like a promise I could not shrug off. People avoided my street now. Neighbors who once offered casseroles at funerals crossed to the other side, their faces turned like sheep refusing to look at a wolf. I thought distance might still me, might kill the knives call, but it only sharpened it. In the quiet, their voices were clearer, naming the next, trading jokes in a language I hated. I learned to move with paranoia as armor, windows checked twice before I left, paths through alleys chosen like prayers. Friends watched for me in case a knife decided their name needed answering sooner than mine. The police had questions once, then turned away when the box's trail smeared too close to officious chairs and neat charity names. They smelled of money and fear and walked without arrest. So I learned the city's pulse by other means. Stolen records, whispered confessions over cheap coffee, ledger pages smuggled out of vaults. Each page I stole peeled more varnish from the people I'd loved. The knives were not random. They came from a ledger not kept on paper, but etched in blood and family lines. Every name was a node in an older map that tied my mother's generation to mine. I went to places you only enter when you have nothing left to lose. Attics with trunks of yellowed receipts, parish chests, where accounts were kept under lace basements, beneath bakeries where ledgers were rolled into loaves like hidden currency. In one registry, I found a notation I could not decipher until a retired clerk, hands trembling, eyes like a man who had seen the wrong moon, took my hand and traced the symbol. He whispered a name I had heard in nightmares. The Covenant. Not a single man, he said, but a pact. Women and men had once bound themselves with ritual to keep prosperity flowing, sacrifices disguised as blessings so the city would not starve. The knives, he told me, were their enforcement, passed down to one woman in each generation as a brutal way to keep the ledger balanced. The box I held was not justice, it was inheritance. Knowing the origin didn't make the box kinder, it made it heavier. The next knives glowed with a hunger I couldn't ignore, names of people whose smiles I trusted, whose hands had steadying warmth when my grief crashed like waves. I found a contractor whose polite nod hid a ledger of girls moved off-grid, an anchor woman who rewrote headlines to bury inconvenient deaths, a social worker who signed intake forms with a practiced hand and closed files as if they were drawers of secrets. Each encounter carved me down, carved me into a narrower shape. Killing was no longer a moral calculus. It became a ritual. Approach. Witness the truth their pockets hid. Strike. Feel the blade vanish. Check the box as it hissed and glowed with the next calling. Sometimes the knife's vanishing left a taste of ash in my mouth, the phantom smell of incense and old money. Sometimes the next name hurt because it was a child of a man I'd once shared a beer with. The knives took nuance and offered only absolutes. As the list dwindled, people began to notice patterns that the police either ignored or feared to face. A journalist I had bribed with an envelope and a favor published the first real thread. Payments made to foundations linked to charities that bore the names of women who disappeared. The story spread like some small contagion. Comment sections filled with the voices of the bereaved, hashtags trended, and even the markets flinched at the risk. The Covenant's older members met in panic, in rooms with thick curtains and thicker wine. I heard their laments through payphones and overheard conversations filtered through back doors. They argued like old men about PR and prisons and the logistics of being unearthed. Greed makes people clumsy at confession. Too many greedy hands led to fingerprints, and fingerprints led to accounts. Their panic fed me. They began to make mistakes. Misfiled receipts, hurried transfers that left traces, phone calls that assumed too much. Every mistake was a gift. Every gift widened the map I followed. There were betrayals I never expected. A woman I had once met at a fundraiser, clever in pearls, eyes like flint, was the one who showed me the ledger tape that tied a judge to a shipping manifest. She expected thanks. She expected me to be a sister in some quaint sense. Instead, I drove the fifth knife into the place between her ribs where ambition lives. Her name vanished mid-cry. There was a rhythm emerging to these kills, a cadence that I tried not to feel. At night, when the city quieted, I would sleep with the box beneath my head and dream of blades clicking like metronomes. The knives stopped being tools and started becoming a chorus I could not silence. They had their own appetite, and I was only the hand that fed them. I tasted that truth in mornings I woke to a new name, and wondered if the list would ever end before my own name glowed hotter than the rest. Then came the night I realized someone was always watching me watch them. A camera in the alley I used to slip papers, a neighbor with a lens in his attic, a child who followed me and carved my shadow into his tree. The Covenant had eyes I had not considered, not just officials and priests, but families, wives who protected husbands they could not bear to accuse, children who learned the economy of silence as a trade. I felt trapped in a net of gazes, and the knife's call grew urgent. Move, strike, survive. Paranoia sharpened me. I began to set traps of my own. I left evidence at scenes to bait the right eyes, planted rumors that pushed infighting, whispered names into ears of lovers until they turned on each other. Sometimes I wondered if I was still Vera, or just the echo of the box's will. The knives demanded completion, and I obeyed because the alternative was to let the ledger stand. To let the ledger stand would let Leah's name be a footnote, would let her death be buried twice. By then, the idea of passing the box away was a bitter joke. Legend said you could end the line by blood by refusing to spill it further, by ending the wielder before the last blade found you. But the knives had never been broken, not in any story I could salvage from old women's lips and pub gossip. They were survival, then punishment, then a lineage. My reflection in a dark window sometimes looked like a woman I used to be and sometimes like a stranger with a blade-shaped tooth for a smile. I hunted one of the Covenant-S architects in a suburb where the houses wore lawns like medals. He had gardens and an old dog and a son who had never seen a grave. I sat on his porch and listened to him tell jokes about business. When he laughed loud enough for the dog to howl, I slit him quietly, and the knife vanished into a cold breeze. His son found his body in the morning, and the boy's grief looked at me like accusation. The knives do not care for sons. They do not love the people you break to save yourself. At the edge of my endurance, I traced one more lead, and it brought me to a church on the hill. Not a place for prayers, but an archive for papers too ugly for daylight. There, in a chest wrapped in oilcloth, I found what I had feared. A ledger with my own name written in a hand I knew. Beside it, a portrait of a woman whose face matched mine like a cracked mirror, dated a century before I was born. Under her image, in looping script, the words, "Keeper of the Blades." The box was not an accident, not a gift from a stranger at a funeral. It was inheritance, and the inheritance had been waiting for me. The knives were not mine to wield. I had been chosen long before Leah drew her last breath. Understanding was a wound that bled into fury and something darker. The knowledge that I might be less a chooser and more a continuation. The final blade, My blade glowed faintly in the box like a last winter moon, patient and terrible. The box sat open before me like a mouth that never closed, its final blade glowing faintly, my name carved into its steel with strokes too deep to erase. I traced those letters with a finger that shook, and when the skin split against the groove, I swore I felt the knife drink it. The others were gone now, vanished into smoke and ash after I'd buried them into chests and throats and bellies of men and women who once seemed untouchable. Every glow extinguished, every name consumed, until only mine remained. The covenant had been gutted. Its architects were corpses with eyes wide in surprise. And yet the knives whispered still, not with hunger for strangers, but with a hunger for me. I wondered if this was the true justice all along, not killing them, but killing myself, completing the circle so it could begin again. I wondered if Leah had known when she begged the air in her last diary page to end it. The paranoia became unbearable. Windows rattled when no wind blew. The television turned itself on at night, static humming with voices that weren't words but laughter sharp as blades. I walked through streets and saw the faces of the dead in reflections, Daniel in a shop window, Marianne in the rearview mirror, Ethan standing behind me in puddles. I had cut them down, but they clung to me, sewn into the seams of my reality by the knives' will. The city had begun to treat me as a rumor, children whispering about the woman with the knives who haunted alleys. Men in suits crossed themselves when my shadow touched them. But what frightened me was not their fear. It was the fact that some of them bowed slightly as if I were more priestess than butcher, as if they knew the knives had passed judgment and I was now the blade itself. I tried everything to break the box. I burned it in oil and it hissed like wet flesh but emerged unscarred. I hurled it into the river, but when I returned home, it waited on my bed like a loyal dog. I took it to a blacksmith whose hands had bent iron for 50 years, and his hammer shattered instead of the box. In my desperation, I turned to ritual, salt circles, blood offerings, invocations stolen from books bound in mildew. Each attempt only made the knives laugh harder in the back of my skull, a chorus that grew louder the more I begged. Finally, I understood. The box could not be broken. It could only be fulfilled, and fulfillment meant my blood. The covenant, I learned, had not been entirely destroyed. In the shadows of that church, in records too fragmented to silence, I found mention of succession. The box never ended, it passed. From mother to daughter, from one bloodline to the next, always hunting, always balancing the ledger of sin. My sister had been next, but they sacrificed her to feed their prosperity, until the knives chose me instead. That was why her coffin had been empty, why her name had appeared in the box. She had been meant to wield them, and when she was stolen from it, they branded me. Leah had not died because she was weak. She had died because the knives refused to rest, and the covenant feared her mercy, so they forced the cycle onto me. I should have wept. I should have collapsed under the weight of it. Instead, I laughed. A sound too sharp, too bitter, echoing in the dark, like a blade drawn across stone. If the knives thought I would surrender to their curse, they were wrong. If the covenant thought their ledger could be balanced on my blood, they were fools. I made a decision that night in the silence of my empty room. I would not die by the last knife. I would pass it on, but not the way they intended. Not quietly, not hidden. I would choose the loudest way possible, a way that tore the covenant's last threads apart and left the box as a wound in the world no one could ignore. So I set the stage. I walked into the cathedral at the heart of the city, not as a worshiper, but as a herald. The press had gathered, tipped by whispers I had fed them myself. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust toward me as I strode down the aisle with the box in my hands. Gasps rose when I opened it, when I showed them the gleaming final blade with my name carved into its steel. I told them the truth, every detail of the covenant, every crime hidden under their wealth, every sacrifice demanded, every ledger signed in blood. I spoke with the fervor of a prophet and the calm of a judge. When I lifted the knife high, the crowd recoiled, expecting I would bury it into my chest. Instead, I pressed it into the hands of a girl standing in the front row, young, wide-eyed, trembling. "Your turn," I whispered. The box sealed itself with a snap, the glow vanishing as if it had found its new host. Chaos erupted. The press screamed. Cameras captured every second. The girl fainted with the weight of it. The Covenant members who had survived tried to flee, but the crowd turned on them with fists and curses. The knives had never needed secrecy, only obedience. And now obedience had spread like contagion, infecting new bloodlines. I walked out of the cathedral untouched, the final blade no longer my burden. For the first time in months, I felt air in my lungs that didn't taste of iron. But freedom was a cruel joke, because in every reflection, in every whisper of night air, I still heard them. Not the knives themselves, but the memory of them. The girl would carry the box now, but I had carried it long enough that its weight had carved itself into me forever. And sometimes when the city is quiet and the moon is a sharp silver grin, I still see Leah in the shadows, standing with her arms crossed, her face unreadable. I wonder if she forgives me, or if she is waiting for the knives to circle back, as they always do, to finish what I refused. Because the truth isn't that the knives end with a wielder. The truth is that they are patient. They will come again. And when they do, another funeral will open the door, another name will glow, another cycle will begin. The knives never rest. The knives never forget. And maybe one day, when I am too tired to run, they will carve my name again. Deeper this time, final this time. Until then, I walk the city like a shadow with empty hands, but in my chest I still feel 13 knives humming.